Morning everybody, happy sewing. For anybody who's watching it today, it is October 31st and I've got some more morning tarot for you. This is 3 days in a row for me, so I'm feeling really quite accomplished for getting 3 days worth of tarot done, and I'm enjoying it too. So I've done the 2, 3 and 4 and the 5, 6 and 7 of swords, so today it is the 8, 9 and 10 of swords. Let's get this up here on my wobbly stick. Okay. See that. Now 8, 9 and 10 of swords are all fairly dramatic looking images. They're all quite guess a little bit alarming sometimes to look at, and it's important to bear in mind, I think, that the swords are a suit that do talk about a lot of the challenges and a lot of the difficult things that we face and difficult things that we go through. And as you progress through the suit of swords, I think that these situations become kind of more and more challenging and more difficult. So here, looking at the 8 of swords, if only I had a camera that focused, because I'm sitting quite far behind actually, so that's why the focus is not so good here. But if I leave autofocus on, it just focuses in and out and it will drive you crazy, and me as well. So the 8 of swords, what we're looking at here is looking at a woman who's standing bound up, her eyes covered, the swords all around her, almost like hemming her in, so she can't really move in any direction because she's got swords everywhere. She can't see where she's going. You've got a house or a castle right in the background here on the rock, and she's standing in mud and water. And this is an image that brings to mind a feeling of being quite powerless, of being quite helpless, of feeling almost embarrassed or ashamed, of feeling very low, of sort of feeling that you are in a situation where everything is going wrong and you've got problems all around you and you don't know what to do, and you feel like, you know, you almost feel very like a victim. There's a lot of victim mentality for me around this card, because it really is presenting yourself as some kind of a victim, of feeling very sorry for yourself, feeling very down, and also feeling hopeless, feeling like you're in a situation that you can't get out of, you don't know what to do, and you feel stuck. Literally, she is like, she's in the mud, she's feeling quite low about herself, and the actual situation around it in general looks quite alarming. But I think the important thing to notice about this is actually that the woman is not bound very tightly. Like the binds that are around her are actually quite loose. The thing covering her eyes is quite loose, her feet are free. So you get the impression that if this person wanted to, they could quite easily get out of these kind of binds and these things that are holding them and making them feel sort of quite low and quite lowly and quite embarrassed or miserable. And they'd actually be able to step out of these bounds, take the cover off their eyes and look around and see that actually the way out is not as difficult as it seems. So I think when you're looking at this, you're looking at somebody who's in a situation where they have these feelings, where they can have almost like thought themselves into a corner. Maybe they're quite depressed, and because of that they don't see the possibilities for getting out. They're focusing only on the negative feelings and negative things around them, rather than looking at the fact that they could get themselves out of this situation, or that perhaps it's not as bad as it seems. It can be often a situation where you might have a blessing in disguise. For example, I got this card in reading not long ago. I was reading for a lady who turned out had lost her job. She'd been made redundant, and I described this card to her and the feelings, and she really understood that, because that's how she was feeling. She was feeling depressed, she was feeling low, she was feeling quite hopeless, she was feeling miserable and feeling very much as though she was in a situation where she didn't know what to do. It was quite embarrassing, it was quite distressing. But actually it was also at the same time an opportunity to look for something else, to change direction, and she just needed to change her perspective and change the way she was looking at the situation, and realise that it might feel like she was surrounded by swords, surrounded by problems, surrounded by issues on all sides, and she might be feeling bad and depressed because of that. But once she realised that that was almost like a prison of the mind, I think it's very much a prison of the mind in that sense, because people get themselves stuck in these thought patterns and they get stuck in this place where they feel like they just can't do anything, like things are never going to get better. Once you realise that and recognise that, then it becomes a lot easier to step out of these kind of restrictions that you feel and look for ways to resolve situations and ways to improve things for yourself. So if this comes up in a reading, think about the person, think about the cards that are around the card, and think about the feeling that comes with that sort of sense of helplessness or sense of feeling like a victim. It's not about judgment or saying, you know, pull yourself together or anything like that, because you need to have compassion, and you have to understand, I think most people do understand how it feels to be in that situation where you do feel quite hopeless, but there is almost always a way out. And oftentimes it is about getting out of that sort of victim mentality, and it's getting out of your own head and sort of realizing that you don't need to feel ashamed, you don't need to feel embarrassed. And a lot of the times other people don't look at you in that way. You're actually putting those labels on yourself, and it's kind of a form of self-imprisonment. The Nine of Swords, very dramatic image this is. When you get through to the Nine of Swords, you're seeing a lot of black. I mean, black is a feeling of being depressed, it's a feeling of anxiety, it's a feeling of despair quite often. It's a feeling of things closing in and not being able to see. And this card here, I think, is quite a clear representation, and I always think, almost every time, that this card will indicate, quite literally, that somebody's having trouble sleeping. I know how it feels to have trouble sleeping. I have big sleeping problems. I was up last night for hours in the middle of the night. I couldn't sleep. And I was actually thinking about this card whilst I was doing that. My stick's a bit unpredictable today. It keeps moving towards me. So looking at the figure here and looking at what's going on in this situation, you can see someone who literally is unable to sleep. They're probably having disturbed sleep, and the reason for this is because they have so much hanging over them. The individual swords in a card often represent different challenges, different problems, different worries, different emotions, and things that are building up on top of the person. And when you're in this kind of situation, when you're feeling really quite miserable or unhappy or depressed, or you're feeling afraid, or you're dreading something, or you've just got so many worries and so many cares and so many troubles building up on you, and you're going round and round and round and round and round and round in your head, you can be literally driving yourself crazy because you're just building them and building them and building them. And you can feel quite like this, almost like you've just got swords hanging over you. They're just up above your heads. You can't think, you can't sleep, you can't get away from that feeling of worry and that feeling of anxiety, that feeling of fear, whatever the situation is that's bothering somebody. It could be one situation that's just very intense, or it could be lots of different things and different problems that are building up on top of somebody. And when you see this card in the reading, I think usually it's an indication that somebody is really, really imprisoning themselves. They're very worried, they're either very afraid, they're very stressed out, and it's starting to affect them physically as well as mentally. And the problem with this is you can get into a situation where you let the troubles and the worries and the problems stack up, so they're hanging over you all the time, and yet people can be afraid to let them fall, because as soon as these things fall, then you have to deal with them. And so this represents that sort of situation where everything is still hanging over you. Maybe you're dreading something that's coming up, or you're just worrying and worrying and worrying about something, you're manifesting that, and you're trapped in this kind of just despairing, I hope that's really, I'm about to say, I hope everybody knows how this feels. It's not very nice, is it? I mean, I'm sure everyone knows how that feels. We've all been there at some time or another, especially people who suffer from anxiety or depression, or have been through like difficult situations or quite fear-filled situations. Now, I remember when I first, very first got my tarot deck, this card was the one that alarmed me the most to look at. Before I understood it and I understood what it meant, I thought it just looked like a hideous, fearful, awful situation. Now we've got the chap here lying on the ground, swords all stacked up, they're sticking out of his back, there's the darkness in the background, it just looks like absolute disaster. Now, this card can and usually does mean that something difficult has happened, is happening, is going to happen. Something is going to be quite challenging, and it's very much a progression from the Nine of Swords. So in the Nine of Swords, we've got all the worries, all the fears, everything, the problems stacked up, and people are stressing and stressing and stressing about it and thinking about it, and they're so afraid of what's going to happen when finally the swords fall. And this is the card where the swords have fallen, so they're no longer things that you're driving yourself crazy with. These are actually things now that have manifested that you have to deal with. But the most important thing I think to note on this card is that as soon as you take those problems out of your head, out of worry, as soon as you stop dreading things and something actually happens, that is when you see the clearing of the skies. You see that the the yellow, the mental energy is there. It's breaking up this kind of feeling of blackness, this feeling of despair that's been around. And quite often, what you're dreading is this. You're dreading like these situations actually happening, or whatever it is that's bothering you getting worse and having to deal with it and really having to face up to it. But when it does happen, most of the time, it's not quite as bad as you think, because when that happens, you can finally start to deal with these problems. You can finally start to deal with these situations, and that will be the thing that breaks the blackness. It will break that kind of awful cloud that has been sitting around you, the things that have been stressing you out. Once you face up to something, you can conquer it and you can move on. And so I think that's what this card is talking about. It's talking about having situations that, yes, aspects of things that might be hurtful, that might have been distressing. You might have had something happen that you weren't expecting, or something that you've been dreading happening actually does happen. And as we often hear, if you're talking about people who've been to therapy and done kind of shadow work and things like that, often encourage you to think, okay, what am I afraid of? Why am I afraid of it? If this happens, what is the worst thing that could happen? So if I'm really worried that I'm going to lose my job, for example, and you have that thought and you have that worry and you have that anxiety, and then you have to stop and ask yourself, okay, what's the worst thing that could happen? Oh, the worst thing that could happen is I could lose my job. Okay, so if you lose your job, what's the worst thing that could happen as a result of that? Or, I might have to cut down on my finances, or etc. And so, okay, well, how do you feel about that? And then what's the worst thing that could happen? And using this sort of to help you realise that when the worst does happen, it's over with. It's a relief. It's a release. And this is a number 10. Now, number 10 in all of the different suits in the tarot deck actually represents what we call a gate card. So a gate card is an opportunity. When you reach 10, you're getting towards the end of the suit, and you're literally looking at some kind of gate, an opportunity, or something's happened. There's going to be a change, there's going to be a shift. It's a real opportunity for growth. So when you get the 10 of Swords, you're looking at somebody who's finally facing up to things, who's finally dealing with problems, who's let the swords fall and is sorting through them. And it's very much a renewal. They can kind of leave behind the anxious, worried figure, the anxious, worried side of themselves, the fear that's been holding them trapped. That, the swords fall in that, and you can let that go and leave that behind, and you'll clear all the negative energy, all the stuff that's been blocking you, everything that you've been dreading or worrying about, that's been affecting you, will start to clear up. You will start to be able to work through these things, and you can leave that behind. So I think you can look at very much positive aspects of this card. So I hope you're all going to have a lovely day today. Anybody who's celebrating, have a great time. And I will talk to you again soon, hopefully tomorrow morning. Bye.